You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm here with Caitlin, Kelly, and Neel Shah, who co-founded VIVID, and want to talk about earned media and PR and how things are evolving in that category. So since you guys co-founded the firm recently, we might as well start with the origin story. So what's the origin story for VIVID?
So we started the business, we started working on the business, I think in around 2019. And the story was really figuring out a way to add some technology to the PR space and arming PR professionals with better tools so that they can work more productively. And the original idea was actually Caitlin's, was building a calendar of editorial opportunities, as well as awards and lists, events and conferences, and putting them into one big database that was easily accessible and searchable, indexable, et cetera. And so we spent the next, call it year or so building that, and we officially launched the business and incorporated it in April of 2020. So you can imagine the world was a very different place in March and April of 2020. So all the folks that said they wanted to buy a subscription to what we were building disappeared from the face of the planet.
I think the other thing to just consider is that this database was predicated on media companies and their editorial priorities. And so when COVID happened, everything changed, right? Events were canceled left and right. Like, I remember looking at our teammate and just having no idea what to do, right? Like, because the entire foundation of the product was upended. So it was definitely like an education in founding a company. So
we, kind of a lesson I've learned in the past from being an entrepreneur and founding different businesses is you got to pivot quickly. And so we're kind of staring, I think it's your phrase, right? It's staring into the abyss, chewing glass. It's kind of what we were doing. We didn't really, our product wasn't viable at the time. And so we pivoted, we built an agency around our technology. So instead of externalizing our tech and selling it, we internalized it. And we said, look, let's just build the best, agency that we can, and let's do it with technology. And, the resulting agency that we built, and we scaled that over the next couple of years, was precisely that. We were able to get more done with fewer people and help our clients out in really great ways to help them build their brands and tell their stories. And then we continue to evolve our technology along the process. And so I think we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but we've built some new tools since then that we are now bringing to market.
Great. Well, I look forward to hearing more about that. And certainly the industry has shown that there's a white space in the category that allows for newer entrants besides sort of Decisions and Meltwaters of the world to enter in. Muck Rack just recently took a significant investment at a pretty lofty valuation. So that's great news for them, obviously, and it's also
we think very highly of Greg and what he's built, because I think what he did and the valuation was really a testament to his being patient over the last few years and not raising any outside capital, keeping his nose down and just building a business, the right way. And as someone who's invested in entrepreneurs and as an entrepreneur, I have a great deal of respect for that.
As do I, and I've interviewed him on the E-Marketing Association podcast. He's great. So he's a little more nomadic, although I think he's somewhat settled in Miami at the moment. He was going to be more nomadic, but Miami sucked him in, I think. So one of the challenges that a lot of folks in the earned media and PR space face is that the client's strategy sometimes is misaligned from the get-go, right? So if you feel like the client's strategy needs work, how hard do you nudge them into sort of re-evaluating their strategy as opposed to just executing against the existing strategy that they come to you with?
Well, we're quite honest with their clients.
We nudge them softly with a stick.
All right. So
Um,
I guess they often need more than a nudge.
Yeah, I mean, look, our experience has been, and Caitlin has 15 years of doing this, and I have 2. So, but generally, we believe that transparency and honesty is the right approach. And if your client is not listening to you, and ultimately you think they're going to be unhappy, then it's better to have that conversation up front.
I mean, listen, we are an agency. We're an external partner. We endeavor to become a material part of the team, and feel as though we are truly an extension of our clients' teams. And so that's always our goal. And so with that comes a responsibility to be super honest and sort of look into the future and predict what we anticipate coming around the corner that they might not see. Because if you're moving 50,000 miles an hour, doing, God knows what, building your business, we're paid to provide them with those strategic recommendations. And then if they don't listen, that's their priority or, prerogative, right? So, and it's our job too, to take that feedback and evolve and iterate as a result of that. So if they decide not to take the recommendation, then we have to create the best outcome that we know given that decision. So, so that's what.
Yeah, and look, we may not be privy to all perfect information. All we have is our experience and what we see in the industry. And we look at it kind of in a different way, I think, to most agencies, particularly given my background in investment management and as an entrepreneur. And I think that actually helps when we speak with other entrepreneurs. Our goal is to really help them see around corners, and and that's just our job. We're purely advisors.
I would also just add really quickly to that, and then we should move on. But I worked at a company, an advisory firm prior to this, and similarly, all of the folks who worked at that advisory firm were operators, right? We walked in everyone's shoes. Neel comes from an investment management background, so fintech companies particularly really appreciate his suggestions because they're rooted in experience. Similarly with me, I've worked in the ad tech and marketing technology space for most of my career. And so these recommendations aren't,
they're not white papers or, academic.
Right.
They're practical.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly agree. That's great advice for folks on the agency side, right? You're being paid for your expertise, so share it. And I think it's great advice for folks on the client side in that if you're bothering to pay an agency for their strategic guidance, you should probably at least listen to it and then choose to dismiss it. Again, maybe you have more information than they do, and maybe they've misread a market force. But in the end, if you're paying for the advice, you should at least listen to it.
I think it also has to do, Kevin, with what a client, what their expectations are and what they think they're paying for, right? And one of the observations that we had pretty early on was that our wedge is always PR, it's communications. The clients were asking us questions that were much bigger than that. And so that's great for those clients. Sometimes clients just want PR, right? Like they just want a recommendation for how to reach media with a story that's going to resonate with them, and they don't want anything else. And so that's where I think sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect, which is like, what is that client's expectation? What are they actually expecting to pay for and get back as a product that's a service? So it's a little malleable. So I think that that's just something that we're always sort of recalibrating our work based on their expectations.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, that's why within the industry, some folks will use PR or public relations as a way to describe it. Other people will use corporate communications, which is sort of at least often like one strategic step higher, right? From a thinking perspective and from a strategy perspective.
Yeah, it gets complicated for us because we do a lot of work with executives and profile development, right? So it's not strictly corporate branded, like, brand communications. We're people, right? Like, and companies are made up of people. So sometimes corporate communications as a moniker sort of gets a little like impersonal for me. Not that public relations is any better, but I don't really know what to call it. We do a lot of work.
That's great. But
I think the in vogue term is strategic communications that covers it all.
Yeah.
that sounds somewhat impersonal as well. So we'll have to think of coin a new phrase that has to do with, tapping the people, that are one level closer to the brains, right?
Yeah.
So, what's interesting is I think through the evolution of the digital platforms, right? Whether they're, they started with press release platforms, and then they started to layer in the databases and the tracking and everything. But the initial explosion was sort of press releases and old school publicity. And so, a question that I sometimes hear come up, and I certainly have my own perspective on it, is whether press releases are still important. So what's your thinking on that?
We think they are important. I think they serve a very useful purpose to allow any organization to get a announcement out widely to the public, and that's an important service. There's different ways to approach that, and press release is one way to do it.
I would just add to that by saying that a press release, to Neil's point, there are lots of ways to do it, but let's just talk about press releases since that's what the question is. It's a forcing mechanism to push clients, to CEOs, heads of communications, whatever, to articulate their business news, whatever that may be. And so by going through the process of putting that pen to paper and doing it in a structured format, which is a press release, it's very structured, it forces the company to get clear about what they're actually talking about. And you would be shocked. I mean, every PR professional who is or is not listening to this would not be shocked at how frequently CEOs or senior people within organizations that are very large cannot articulate what it is their news, right? They just can't. Like, there's lots of things going on, and it's very tough to put a fine point on news. And so we believe that, like, press releases aren't going away, right? There've been these startups that have tried to innovate press releases. It might evolve into another format, right? Like video might someday be a press release, but like, we really believe in the power of writing it down and putting it inside of that container.
And ultimately, it's a very, not to be trite, but it's a very snackable form of content. It's a very standardized, form of information.
Yeah, and I think whether or not they're important is a question, right? Which we just answered. But another question that you might ask is, I don't know what the question is, but the point is that CEOs still want them. Right. Everybody still wants a press release. Whether or not they're still important is sort of irrelevant, because founders, CEOs, senior leaders within organizations want them, and they want them for lots of different reasons, right? I always say it's from SEO to vanity, right? Like, and everything in between. They represent PR to a ton of people. And so they're not going anywhere anytime soon.
Right. Well, I really loved your point about the thought exercise of going through the process of creation.
Yeah.
How important that is, because it's very similar to one of the main reasons that business plans for new businesses are important, right? Is even if you throw it out like 3 weeks into the business, because everything changed, you had to go through the rigorous exercise, and that rigorous exercise itself delivered a ton of value. Even if you never send it out, right, on a press release, you still had to go through the thought process of thinking about, what is the news? Why is it newsworthy?
Yeah.
And who would I be sending it to if I choose to hit the send button? So
Yeah.
I think those are all really valid points.
And we do that a lot with our clients, even when we start, is we go through that thought experiment, and we ask them to project their views of the company in the future and say, you're issuing a press release 5 years from now. What does your business look like? What do you want to be announcing? And that helps us align objectives between the C-suite. You'll be surprised how many CEOs and CMOs will have very contrasting viewpoints on what the future holds for their business. And that helps us align, mission and vision, and actually have some clarity internally, which we think is really important.
Now, we just talked a lot about creating a press release, so writing it. We didn't talk about the distribution aspect of a press release, right? And so that's where, in our opinion, or at least in mine, and I don't want to speak for him, but there's like a lot of gray area, right? This conversation is about PR. We may not necessarily, or you may not necessarily get coverage from a press release, but we certainly think it's important to write it down.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and is a perfect segue into my next question, because I've been lucky enough to occasionally get PR where I didn't have to work for it at all. Right, the biggest example of that was where I tried to buy Gawker and turn it into Gawker for Good, and like the phone rang off the hook, and my email inbox was flooded because it's just such a brand that journalists wanted to talk about. But when I've got a client, or even myself, and I want to get PR, I often find that I have to sit with my PR team and think about, well, what's the bigger story, as opposed to what's newsworthy specific to me or specific to my client's brand, right? So, when I was trying to get public relations coverage for my Fire Island beach house on the ocean front, I decided to pitch, a bigger story to the editor of the Wall Street Journal Mansion section, which is, the idea that people are starting to invest heavily in Fire Island home rebuilds, right? And she loved the idea, and had an entire section of the mansion section called Fire Island Gets Fancy. And my house just happened to be the featured house, right? So I had to figure out what was the bigger story that I fit in. And I find that sometimes for clients, they're not always in the most exciting category, right? And you have to figure out, like, what's the bigger trend story, and then how to piece them into it, as opposed to it's less scalable. So that's the thing is, if you're going to do that, you almost have to pitch each individual reporter and or publishing entity separately, right? Because you need to sort of really know what it is that they cover and the lens through which they cover it. And I sort of see that as being entirely different than a press release related blast, right? Where everybody gets the same one. And so how do you guys find that balance between, okay, here's the message that everybody gets that we wrote into the press release, and then here are some reporters and or publishing entities where we feel like there's a bigger story we want to get out there. And yeah, we get to go along for the ride if it gets covered. And do you, it's a lot more labor, right, to think through what's the story that's going to resonate with a specific reporter, and how do you find that balance for a client, like, to pursue those kinds of opportunities?
Yeah, I can take a stab at it. Look, I think that what is newsworthy today is very different than what's going to be newsworthy tomorrow. And so if you're constantly trying to chase, that process and that outcome, you're going to end up with a very, likely a very conflicting story internally. So for us, like, we tend to make the press releases pretty dry and factual, but we have good relationships with journalists, and we have a sense of what they think is newsworthy, and we are always speaking with them. And so to the extent that that the news and the type of news is consistent with what a journalist may find interesting, that's where we make the match. But I think we advise our clients not to try and position yourself just to try to meet whatever is newsworthy at the time, because that's going to change. And it's also going to result with your company, our clients' companies, not having a true north. And you should always stay true to what your business is doing, because that's your primary objective. And eventually it'll catch up to you. If you do your job and you build your business the right way, you're going to become newsworthy. But if you try to chase what is newsworthy today and try to build a business around that, invariably you're going to fail.
It's great advice.
Yeah. I think that, media relations is a relationship business. And so every CEO should be thinking about the media that cover their industry or their, real estate or whatever those topics are, and get to know those journalists. Because journalists want great information. They want a great story, right? They just don't want a puff piece about X company that's raised $30 million at XX valuation. I mean, even though sometimes they do, that can be a good story. But I think that that's the job of a good PR person, right? It's the job of a good executive who has a PR, capability or interest. We're an agency that does that for our clients. And I will say that we're quite expensive. So a lot of companies can't afford to pay an agency like ours. And there lied an opportunity that we sort of realized recently, which was, small businesses are a huge portion of the economy, yet a multiple $1,000 retainer is not something that they can swallow every month. And so that's what Neel and I have been spending a lot of time in the past few months focusing on, which is providing smaller businesses that still have great stories, right? Maybe it's not a Wall Street Journal mansions, cover story, but it could be something for their local paper, something that's happening in their community that's newsworthy. And so we've been spending a lot of time focused on that as well.
Yeah, we found especially, and maybe even pre-March, right, before the venture industry really took a nosedive. But we found that a lot of journalists were really obsessed with just valuation headline numbers. If it didn't have an extra set of commas, they just weren't interested. Well, businesses exist in all different shapes and sizes. And just because they're at an earlier stage or they're raising money more slowly doesn't mean their news is less relevant. And that specifically goes for very small businesses, which are all, folks that are entrepreneurs trying to build the business in their own way. It's to Caitlin's point, for us, the exercise was, can we create a product that can help smaller businesses, which really comprise 90+% of the U.S. economy? Can we help them with an easy to use tool that can allow them to get their news out and be heard, just as maybe not as much as a company that just raised around a $10 billion valuation, but at least reach the community around them that's most relevant.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I've always defined earned media fairly broadly. How do you recommend marketers and CEOs and VPs of marketing define it? Should they include SEO? Should they include content marketing? Or should they think of it more narrowly like PR?
So I defined earned media as free, right? You're not spending money on it. And a third party, produces this content about you without any exchange of money. That's how I define PR. Now, we have a product that we launched a couple of months ago in a sort of beta mode, where we create press releases for small and medium-sized businesses for free, right? Because most small businesses don't have the internal team to be able to produce a press release, and they certainly don't have thousands of dollars to throw at it. And that press release becomes a piece of content for them that helps increase SEO. It becomes a piece of native content, right? And so that has lots of purposes, but I still think of that as owned media, right? It's owned until some other third party then, talks about it.
This is it, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great point. I think a tangential point is that it used to be, back when I was first getting into marketing in the early 90s and mid 90s, that people thought about press hits as this thing that happened in a particular point in time, and that was the end of it. Right now, obviously, everything that is defined as an external piece of content, whether it was a story or a press release getting published or incorporated into a bigger story, it's semi-permanent, right? And to your point about SEO, if that semi-permanent or permanent placement, right, has a link back to you, it's evergreen from the perspective of Google knows about it forever and Bing knows about it forever, right? And so I think part of what
you don't
what
use Bing,
marketers,
no one uses Bing. No offense to Microsoft, but that's an airball right there.
yeah, exactly. But I mean, we still have to mention them. You know, it is still millions of people, but obviously, it's not huge on the radar. But the point is really just that, you know, press hits are no longer sort of, you know, a flash in the pan that then you never think about again, right? It's you have to think about it from a longevity perspective.
Yeah. I mean, my old boss used to say that to build a brand takes decades, literally decades. And he probably borrowed that from somebody else. I'm not sure who actually said it, but like to build a brand takes years and years and years, and to destroy it, it only takes a second. Right. And so that's the job of a good PR professional, which is to say, like, this stuff isn't going away. Right. So choose wisely and don't always talk, right? Like, I think a lot, we actually work with a media trainer for a lot of our clients. And it's become sort of in vogue to say something about everything. And it's really not necessary, as I continue to drone on and on and on, but like, maybe the trend, you know, the pendulum will swing back and folks will start to understand that, like, not every company has to have a position on every single topic.
That brings up a tangential question, right? Because many PR professionals dedicate a significant portion of their time just trying to get the executive mentioned for commentary on something, right? Mm-hmm. So even if it's one sentence in a, you know, 1,200 word article or 800 word article, right? They're pursuing that comment, and obviously in the broadcast media, right, it's not a written piece, but it's you know, a little snippet where they end up, you know, on that CNBC piece or on that piece, but the story wasn't about them. They were just providing commentary, right? So on a relative basis, do you feel like businesses should put a lot of focus on that? And if they don't have a charismatic spokesperson, should they sort of forget about that and say, well, you know, we don't have anybody who can step in and be the SME, the subject matter expert on this topic, and therefore that's not an important part of our corporate communications or PR plan?
Yeah, I think it's you know, it's all case dependent. If it's a article that is really germane to their business, where they are a subject matter expert, and they're able to give a quote that is meaningful, then that makes sense. But if it's purely for vanity because their name will appear in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, then that's not a good, you know, that's not a good idea.
Yeah, I would say that charisma or not, media journalists want a well-sourced, informative story at the end of the day. And if you can provide that insight to help them get to that goal, then you, of course, should be doing that. And that sort of goes back to your Wall Street Journal piece. They're looking for trends. They're looking for insights, like surprising things. Last night we had a dinner with a reporter from the New York Times, and he's now writing a story about croissants because the person who I sat next to him was French, and I don't even know what they were talking about. And all of a sudden I turned around and Ed was like, oh yeah, maybe we'll write a story about croissants. I was like, I've been pitching you stories for a long time and you're not writing any stories. Now you're going to cover a story about croissants. My point is that media are looking for stories in all different places. And if you can become a subject matter expert, but provide them with that context, it's a very valuable tool.
That's a great point. One other thing that I noticed you guys talked about on your website was a word that isn't necessarily always associated with PR, which is creativity, right? Now, obviously, the creativity of writing the press release, people might already associate it, but at a broader sense, right? When creativity moves into design, or it moves into the visual elements of creativity, where does that fit into PR? Where does that fit into earned media?
I think it's all about, or ultimately our goal is to storytell, right? And tell the story of our clients and to build their brand. But building a brand is more than just putting out a press release or getting a mention in a newspaper. Building a brand, as Kayla mentioned, takes a really long time. And you have to start at the very beginning. And the very beginning is making sure that you have a very clear view on who you are and what you want, what you're doing and what you want to be. And part of that is going to be written, and that's a big portion of what we do. And part of that's going to be, other forms of content that is going to be visual, or videos, et cetera. And so when we built our business, we realized that to do our job effectively, to really help build brands for our clients and give them the best advice possible, we really needed to have more than just a marketing and PR focus. We had to have a team that was a phenomenal creative team, and we had to have a strategy team too that can speak to CEOs and CMOs about broader business objectives, and how to help them grow their business outside of just the from a PR lens. And so we have those three teams that work together, almost like a SWAT team, to help our clients. And what we found is that when we are really firing on all cylinders, the clients are incredibly happy, because instead of having three agencies to manage, like a McKinsey for strategy consulting, a PR agency for PR and a creative agency for creative, and those three agencies all come with their own baggage, and they all have their own viewpoints, and you could be stuck at the end of the day with a Frankenstein's monster type of problem. Whereas if you have one agency that's doing everything together, the end result is more clear and it's harmonious.
That's a great point. One thing that's certainly changed in the last several years is the way in which events dovetail into PR. Within a lot of industries, the events and the coverage of those events became a really important part of a reporter's beat, right? They'd basically go out to these events, and they would know that this was sort of a fish in a barrel environment for them, right? Because they could talk to a lot of influencers, they could talk to a lot of businesses. It was also fish in a barrel for the PR agencies, because they knew the reporters were going to be there, right? And events are coming back to some extent, but how has your event strategy changed sort of post-pandemic from a PR perspective? Is it sort of back to the same old, or is it actually different now?
Well, we didn't have an event strategy until more recently. That's really because of the pandemic. But we recently hired another ex-media linker to lead our event strategy, and we had an event last night. But what we're finding is that events are coming back very strong. I think people are making up for the 2 years where they
Lost time.
Yeah, they lost time, and now they're very excited to go and see other people and actually mingle and be social again. So we think, and we're certainly betting on events coming back stronger than ever.
Well, I'm betting on it too, actually, not just because I own the e-marketing association, but I'm an investor in Beyond Ordinary Events, which is an events-centric company that's sort of trying to redefine and recreate what they see to be a vacuum in the event space within the marketing category. So we'll have to see how that works out. They've got their first big event in Miami next April.
Yeah. Christian from VIVID+Co launched a new event that'll happen in April in Miami. I mean, we've seen a ton of events in Miami. Why not? It's so much fun down there. Like I should have moved to Miami. But like events are fun,
Yeah,
you get
exactly.
to hang out with people, you get to do some business. Like in my last firm, we spent a ton of time at events. And it was a really important part of our business, right? And so we're quite bullish on events always. something that sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying nothing can really replace meeting someone in an organic setting and having an organic conversation that hasn't been scripted on Zoom, where half the time you're, checking your email and not listening to the person, right? Whereas in person, you're actually forming a relationship and you're there physically. There's no email to distract you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's, ultimately PR, as Caitlin mentioned before, is really relationship driven, and events are a great way to forge those relationships.
The other question I sometimes get from folks is, I've got some venture funded clients as well from the SEO category into paid media, and we have a PR practice. And, if companies are raising money via private placements or Regulation D, do you think they should be thinking about investor relations as sort of a separate piece of their PR strategy?
Well, investor relations is always important, right? It's the lifeblood of a business, is having access to capital and maintaining those relationships with your investors. I think that, in most cases, especially in venture-backed companies, and they're kind of earlier on, maybe a Series A or Series B, those relationships are pretty closely guarded by the CEO, and that's really a function of the CEO putting his or her nose to the grindstone and just executing on a business plan. And once a company grows and you have a deeper bench of investors, then I think it does make sense to make sure that you're communicating with investors effectively, whether it's good news or bad news. Being transparent is the most important thing. And I think it's very easy when you're focused on your day job running a business to forget that. And your investors won't forget that. So, even for us, our investors, we have to remind ourselves that we have to be much better at giving them an updates on the business. After all, it's their hard-earned savings that's powering our business.
Absolutely. Some industries have analysts that are sort of pay for play analysts, right? Where if you really want to get covered by those analysts, if you really want to have those analysts understand what your business does and what value you provide to the marketplace, you pretty much have to pay for play, right? So despite it being pay for play, it's something where typically the PR agency would be the conduit to that relationship with these analysts. So what are your thoughts of how to deal with the pay for play analysts when they're sort of covering an industry and producing grid reports and those kinds of things? Do you feel like that most of the time the company should sort of pay for play, right, and participate there, or do you feel like they should attempt to sort of generate their own ink separate from those analysts?
Well, I think it depends on the stage of the company, right? Like for an earlier stage company, it's less important, I think, unless it's a new industry. We work with a couple of companies in the identity and the privacy space. And for those companies, analysts are very hungry for current information about the space because it's just changing every day. I will say that we actually work exclusively with a partner of ours who's a former Forrester analyst, because it really depends on the company, and it's such a bespoke, important decision for them to make that we defer to our partner who spent 10 years working at a research company. But I would also remind folks that a research report is a much more thorough piece of work than most media stories, right? So the whole process is different than media relations because it has to have just another level of just detail to provide those analysts with the accurate information that they need to put their reports together.
So one area that's pretty popular at the moment is the idea, for micro influencers, you're sort of getting coverage that looks pretty much like PR, right? Although at a very niche basis, or very small coverage basis, where you're seeding them with gifting, of product.
Yeah.
Would you define that as falling under sort of earned media, even though you're sort of the quid pro quo is they got free lipstick or free whatever in
Yeah.
exchange for the social media coverage.
It doesn't really matter what we think. Like, if that free gift to an influencer is generating sales for that company's business, then that's great, right? Because at the end of the day, the biggest measure of efficacy in public relations is sales, right? Are you
Right.
hearing the phone ring? And so it doesn't really matter what we think. I mean, I would say that that is earned, because you're not paying them to write about your product and they want to, right? Like every influencer is not a puppet for every company that they get a new lipstick from. So I would say, yes, that's
Right.
earned.
But your influencer is an ambassador, so you have to be very mindful and choose carefully. They can cut both ways, right? Your phone can also stop ringing because you.
Yeah, and I think that this question is like, it's like a totally fine question. We're, but like, it's sort of silly to be always chasing the like ball on what do we define as this and this and this. And that's why we built our agency like we did, so that we can cover off on lots of these evolving needs. Because you're right, like it's not as cut and dry as it was even when I started my career. So, agencies like ours have to be able to be flexible and agile enough to deliver on lots of random, not that influencer marketing is a random request, but like the types of things that we're managing are not classic PR deliverables.
Yeah. I mean, the primary reason I brought it up is because what I see happening is that in those areas that are sort of in the gray zone, which could be defined as earned media or could be defined as paid media, you've got things happening in both directions, meaning you've got the Edelmans of the world saying, oh, well, this, we're developing a paid media division, right? Because when a social post is good, you want to be able to boost it. Okay, is that still earned media? No, that's not earned media anymore. You're putting ad dollars behind it, right? Similarly, you've got paid media agencies and or creative agencies that are saying, oh, well, influencer marketing is paid from the Kardashians all the way down to the micro influencers. So we're going to establish that practice, right? So you've got agencies that might be defined, at least at first glance, as a paid media agency or a creative agency or a PR agency. And they're sort of encroaching into the other categories simply because the lines are blurrier than they've ever been before, right? So if we're trying to help the brand or the CMO think about it, right, which is really more the reason for the question is, as the CMO sort of thinks about influencer marketing, certainly the Kardashians and having to write a check with a lot of zeros is different than sending a free lipstick to somebody with 35,000 followers, right? In a category. But yet, they're really just orders of magnitude different from each other. One person gets a check, the other person gets a lipstick, right? But functionally, you're hoping that they'll say something nice about your brand. Yeah,
and Kevin, this well, is that we saw this happening in with holding companies, with consolidation and then specialization, and then it sort of the pendulum swings the other way, and then all the holding companies have one P&L, blah blah. So we're seeing that more and more with PR, right? The capabilities are broadening. Will these agencies sort of shrink back and get back to their roots? Maybe, probably, if it follows like the advertising and media buying ecosystem. But we shall see. I mean, we did have an interesting conversation with another editor of an ad trade a couple of weeks ago, and Edelman had just released some earnings. I don't know, but they're doing $1 billion in fees, and that's quite impressive because most of their revenue is pure services. They are media buying, but they're not spending a ton of money on transacting media as most of the holding companies are. So it's still a great business. And maybe things will shift, who knows, but I understand that it is hard for CMOs to make those sort of decisions. And that's why we've tried to do our best by providing specialists within our team. And we've also stayed pretty small. One of the things I think that's a challenge for a lot of agencies is that they get so big that you lose touch with the senior most decision makers that sold you the business. And so that's another challenge with larger agencies too.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's almost the resurgence of the boutiques.
Yeah. Yeah.
We used to sometimes call ourselves big teak, right? Because they're big enough
Yeah.
to do everything that needed to get done, but small enough to make sure you get the owner's attention.
I love that. Yeah.
One of the other challenges that a lot of businesses face is that, their industry perhaps isn't super exciting, or what it is that they do, those problems that they solve are not particularly exciting. And so generating the story ideas can sometimes be a little bit challenging. Have you found that certain conversations internally within the organization, or speaking to certain types of people within the organization, can be the catalyst for those new ideas of ways to go out there from a storytelling perspective?
So
You mean within the client's organization?
Yeah. I mean, for example, we've sometimes found that, like, getting deep into the trenches and talking to customer service people or to sales reps, right, lets you view the business from a different lens, right? Because the things that the CSRs or sales reps are hearing from their customers don't necessarily always percolate up to the executives, right? They should, but they don't, right? And so we found that sometimes when we're trying to think about story ideas, that actually delving down into the trenches has been useful for ideation purposes.
It's even beyond just ideation. We do speak with all different facets of our organization, but we also look at it from strategy lens, and we'll bring that if there is a disconnect between the feedback that a salesperson is getting and and the CEO or someone else on the team that's meant to absorb it and implement any changes. If there's a disconnect there, we also view it as part of our job to bring it up. And that's not always a comfortable conversation, but it is a necessary conversation, because at the end of the day, we're trying to help our clients build their businesses. And one of the ways we help them build their businesses, of course, is through our relationships with the media. But the primary focus in everything is still, how can we help you build your business? And if there's a fundamental problem like that, then it's our duty to bring it up.
Great. Absolutely. I agree there. So final question is there anything coming up over the next year that you're particularly excited about, right? Whether it's a trend or whether it's just something going on that you're excited about for yourselves or for your clients?
Well, Caitlin alluded to it. One of our observations in, even the mundane task of writing press releases was that a press release is still really important to very senior people in our clients' companies, right? The CEO will spend, and we can see this because we use Google Docs, and we can see the CEO of a large company is spending more time, looking over and commenting and editing a press release than we would have ever expected. And I think that speaks to the value of a press release as a form of content that describes and validates their business. So it is important and intimate to them. But we also, one of the problems that we wanted to solve is to write a press release requires either an agency that has a copywriter, right, or an internal function, whether it's in comms or marketing, and then a payment to one of the, really about three, but really two large players in the press release distribution business, and those costs add up pretty rapidly. To put out a good press release could be anywhere, including the cost to write it, could be somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000-$6,000, which is very expensive for some piece of content that's rarely over 1,000 words. And so what one of our kind of innovations was is there a way for us to bring this to small businesses to allow them to get their news out in a way that doesn't cost an arm and a leg and doesn't require them to have a team of marketers or PR professionals behind them. And so we use technology to do that. We created an algorithm that basically will write a press release based on on user input. It takes 5 minutes. It's called Easy Newswire. It's easynewswire.com. It literally takes 5 minutes to write a press release. And we're constantly making improvements to it by adding natural language processing, layers for grammar, and other things that we can fix. The next version will have image capacity and other things that our users have been asking for. But we're now finally hitting a little bit of a stride. It's been 2 months since we launched the beta version, but we're finding businesses really of all shapes and sizes. We even had a public company use it 3 times now. But for the most part, these are small businesses with fewer than 50 employees, in many cases fewer than 10 employees across the country who are using this product. And what it does is in 5 minutes, it creates a very professional looking form of content that they can then use and amplify within their own community. Many of these entrepreneurs, their sales channel is really focused on their immediate vicinity. It's people they know, it's a community they work and reside in. And so this creates a form of content that looks and is very standardized and professional that they can send out to their community and their network to drive sales. And we're now in a stage where we're partnering with publications locally, and these are publications that probably got hit the hardest over the past 10 and 15 years. And we're trying to revitalize these publications by giving them news that is relevant to their community and their audience. I think being able to marry the two, which is getting small businesses and giving them the power and enabling them to create news very quickly, and at the same time local publications giving them content and news that is relevant for their audience, really helps power the entire ecosystem. It really brings everything, it brings both sides up.
Great. Well, look forward to watching that evolve as you continue to refine the technology and gain momentum.
Yeah. Cool.
Perfect.
You should use it. You should use it for your own podcast. It takes 5 minutes.
Exactly. No, I'm happy to be a beta user and give it a shot. So you'll have to send me a link.
Yeah, it's just easynewswire.com.
Yeah, I think it's been, just to put a period on that. It's been an incredibly gratifying experience and humbling experience to be working with so many small business owners across New York. We just formalized a partnership with the Chamber of Commerce here in New York, which is really exciting. And this, Kevin, better than anybody, but it's like, we feel like this is our way to help small businesses. 80% of small businesses only employ one person, right? And there's certainly, if you're a florist or a baker or a cobbler, you're certainly not hiring a PR or a marketing professional. You're hiring another florist or another baker. And so this is our way of enabling small businesses to thrive. And it's exciting.
And it's completely free.
That's great. Well, yeah, it's got a little bit of a mission to it. So I love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thanks so much for joining me. And we'll continue to stay in touch.
Great to see you, Kevin. Thanks.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.